Hey folks, today on the Prior Transformation, I interview Brian Smith, who is a coach that works here in LA with entrepreneurs and founders and leaders. I guess all of those people are the same, but I think you get the idea. This is a time capsule style interview. We recorded this one, I think, two and a half years ago. A lot of stuff honestly still holds up. It's timeless. So you're going to want to, pay attention to this one because it's actually a really good episode. We talk about leading teams. We talk about a lot of the work that he does with folks to get them to unlock their potential and be more effective. So there's some interesting things in here. Just as an FYI, this is another one of those interviews where I hit the record button kind of during levels and doing sound check, and we just started kind of vibing on some really great stuff. So I just left it recording and didn't even, properly do an intro. So apologize for that. You're kind of just going to be dropped into the almost the somewhat beginning of the conversation. But if you kind of just settle in, you'll enjoy it. So here we go. Welcome to the Prior Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Smoots. In this podcast, we explore, there's no we, it's just I. I'm the only person here. And really, I just ramble for 2 or 3 minutes on a technology or business topic. And occasionally, I'll interview some smart folks. If you like that kind of thing, enjoy.
They're sort of like posturing, or they try to show off that they can pay, but they're asking anyways. And sometimes when I have clients here in Santa Monica, a lot of times we'll go up to the 3rd Street there, the promenade, and they will ask. I'll tell them that they have to go out and ask for free coffee. Here's the catch: is I take their wallet and I take watch, anything else that's super expensive, so they can't go out and flash the Rolex or the Breitling or something and be like, oh, I forgot my wallet, and try to separate themselves from the rest of the crowd. But the reason I had brought up the recorder, Rev, is going in and using that and recording the sequence of going in and asking for free coffee. So I have clients oftentimes go and record them asking for free coffee. It's kind of fun to go back and listen to it and to be able to hear what you did and how did you order coffee even differently than if you were to go up and pay. Because the other thing it makes you do is be more personable. You're not just going up and say, I'll take a coffee, and go back to looking at your phone or something. You have to engage that person and, essentially create a emotional or person-to-person transaction. So
that's really cool. Yeah. So it's way different.
It's completely different.
That makes sense. Yeah. Cause it's so transactional. If you just walk up, you're just
then that person is, all they are is a person that hands coffee to you. They are nothing more than the thing between you and your coffee. Yeah. They're not a person that you're actually having to connect with.
So the order is more of an order and less of a request, I guess. Right?
Absolutely.
It's more because it's more large coffee, 2 pumps of whatever, however people order their coffee. Whereas if you're going to ask them for it for free, so how does it work? Do you order the coffee, and then at the end when they say, that'll be $3, just say?
It depends. Typically for me, I'll go up, and I've tried it different ways where I'll just flat out ask, can I get free coffee? And it depends on the person. I've had people that have been no, you can pay for one. And then I've also had folks that are that just made my day. Yeah, you can have a free coffee. Wow. And all you did is just ask her, what to them is a ridiculous request.
That is insane. It's
but here's the unique thing though, is when you think about it that way, where you're actually having to engage with that person. And that may just mean actually making eye contact and smiling, right? You're treating them like a person rather than that obstacle between you and your caffeine, you and your drug. When it comes to managing people or working with anybody, it's the exact same thing. Most people are treating their employees as the person between them and their goal, them and their money, them and the outcome.
Yeah.
And so when you start treating them like that barista that you're asking free coffee from, now you're having to actually treat them like a person. And when you connect at that level, all of a sudden, so many things open up. I mean, if you can get free coffee from a barista in 30 seconds, imagine what happens when you start treating employees like real people as opposed to obstacles.
That's actually really interesting. Treating employees as real people instead of obstacles, and that makes so much intuitive sense. And I think, as a leader, it's hard to think of it that way, right? That you end up thinking of it's right, like you said, you're so focused on the end game, the goal, whatever the long term is, that you kind of lose sight of the fact that there's a person, a real living, breathing person in front of you that's going to help you achieve that. So that's really interesting. So any other tips on like how to, make that differentiation there? Like how do you, as a leader, how can you, help perceive people as people instead
and
of
it's not just employees, right? It's your co-founder, it's your vendors, it's your customers. Treating all of them like people is very difficult when you don't understand your own motivation, right? So if you're purely motivated by getting money, by achieving success, by, proving to somebody in your life that you aren't a failure or something like that, then it's really, really hard to have those interactions with people where you're treating them like a human, because you're not clear on what it is that you're trying to get to. And so oftentimes any sort of interaction or any sort of difficulty that there is between you and that individual, then all of a sudden that is sort of an affront to you, because you're not able to convey clearly where you're trying to go or why they should get to that point. Because if you're just saying, hey, I want to get to, let's say you want to hit your current goal is you want to hit 1 million users, right? If that is your only stated goal, there's so many different ways that you could get to it. And that employee probably doesn't care whether you hit 50,000 or 1 million users, as long as they're continuing to have their job. Now, there's some elements of just the psychological sort of excitement that comes from seeing, numbers grow and things like that, but that only goes so far. Mm-hmm. So if you're saying, I want to, like my motivation is working towards that particular goal or outcome, I guarantee you that there's something below that. And when you understand that, when you can understand like, hey, I just want to be able to spend time with my family, and I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur because of maybe an interaction that you've had when you were younger, or maybe you just kind of want to prove it to yourself, and or maybe it's ego. Mm-hmm. I want to be on the cover of a magazine or whatever it is, and as a result, if you're not clear about that, then it's really hard to connect to that employee and say, what is it that motivates you, and how do I then communicate to you in those terms? Otherwise, they're just, they're that not necessarily direct obstacle to your outcome. They're just like a bump in the road, because they're an obstacle to getting to that 1 million users, but that 1 million users isn't really what you're trying to get to. You're trying to get to some sort of fulfillment. And it gets obscure because we get so diluted in our vision. And so the folks I work with, I talk about, if you delude yourself, you dilute yourself. So you are diluting yourself, reducing like your own effectiveness and really your own, personhood or your own being by being delusional about what it is that you're trying to achieve. And when you have that delusion in front of you, you're going to always reduce your effectiveness. Mm-hmm. So by diluting yourself, you're diluting yourself.
So just thinking more about that concept of delusion and dilution, right? There's a fine line between delusion and optimism, right? Like how do you tease those two things apart? How do you know if you're just being optimistic or you're being delusional about your like long-term goal, whatever that may be?
I think that there's the delusion. the dilution or being delusional is different in the context of what you're talking about versus what I'm talking about. To make sure I understand, delusional in the context of what you're talking about is saying, I'm going to hit 1 million users by the end of the week.
Yeah.
Right. That's, if you're at 10 today, you're not going to hit 1 million by the end of the week unless a miracle happens, unless you have something up your sleeve. Right.
Yeah.
But what I'm talking about as far as delusional is saying that your goal is to achieve 1 million users. And it might even be, you might say that's in 10 years. It might be, overly realistic, but your goal is not that. If you think that is going to give you the feeling of success or the feeling of fulfillment or the acceptance or whatever it is that you're looking for, that's where the delusional nature of our goals occurs. It's not in, being delusional, thinking like disregarding factual evidence that's in front of us. It's by not being honest with ourselves,
not realizing who you are and what you actually believe.
Absolutely,
and not having that be your true north as opposed to maybe something else. That's interesting. So what advice would you give the folks to kind of dig deep and understand that that true north?
That true north is something that, first of all, it does change. I know you had your first child recently, and so you probably have realized that there's been a few changes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the whole paradigm's different now.
Yeah, and so it's something that as long as you're living, you're constantly changing, right? There's always going to be change, and so that true north is always going to shift. Therefore, it's not actually the direction looking out in the future that's as important as looking at where you are today. I say something to the folks I work with, my clients, that is extremely counterintuitive to most entrepreneurs. And that is that on a personal level, goals are not the best way to build on your personal success or to get yourself to fulfillment. Goals are great for communicating vision and working with other people. But on a personal level, operating from a perspective of making decisions that adhere to your values is far more important. So if you're making every decision that adheres to your own personal values, that's going to get you there much more quickly. That's going to get you to that place where you are feeling that feeling of fulfillment, which ultimately, that's why we're doing this, right? There's something about us as entrepreneurs that we're, driven to look for fulfillment through certain avenues. And that doesn't mean that if we achieve something, even if we achieve fulfillment, that we will stop. In fact, that's just going to make us more effective at what we're doing, because then we're not going to be delusional about what it is that we're trying to achieve any longer. We can focus much more clearly. So the practice of working and really honing in on your values, which is really an ongoing practice. You can't just whip out a sheet of paper and be like, here's my top 10 values, because values are something that you've got an emotional attachment to. So it's really, whether you want to be journaling, working with a coach, working with a mentor or advisor, whether that's a business advisor or a spiritual advisor, that's something that constantly returning to those values and digging into them deeply, and checking in and seeing what's important to you today and at different parts of the day is a very valuable practice. There's not an easy way to do it. I've worked on a lot of different practices to try to make it easy. I have methods that I've used with my clients, and whenever I try to make it super easy, then it sort of loses its value.
So it's very much a practice. It's not like something and that's really the value of working with a coach, to help you continue that practice, right? Almost.
Absolutely. Well, it's accountability to some extent, but then it's also a good coach is going to catch patterns, right? And notice that there might be certain things that like certain topics or certain just events that catch your attention more than others. And so, while there's certain values that oftentimes come out very quickly, like, family or in some cases it might be achievement or something like that. But ultimately, the real value is understanding those sort of hidden ones, the ones that aren't really at the forefront because you think that that it's drive, or you're mistaking like a goal or the achievement of a goal as being that sort of value, achievement being the value, whereas there's something behind that makes achievement important to you. And when you can dig into that with a coach or with an advisor or whomever, that's where the really valuable work starts.
Okay, that's great. So I'm just gonna let a little bit tape run because then I'll like edit this back in.
Yeah, no worries.
We'll like start from the beginning. I know I'm just like so good, we got it, which is great, but we'll start from the beginning here, and then we'll kind of like.
Well, I can give you one more thing that actually applies to that real quick, because it goes directly to a lot of that stuff that we were just talking about, like that concept of working towards something. This is and we can go through it again.
Maybe I'll just I'll take a note.
Because like the crazy thing about the way that most entrepreneurs operate is that where we are today, we think like we want to feel some sort of stillness, some sort of like that fulfillment, right? We want something that we want to experience that is sort of a consistent thing, right? We want to get to a point where we're no longer striving to achieve something. Now we want to build. There's one element of just enjoying the process and building, but there's also, in a lot of entrepreneurs, there's this desire to get to a place. There's a desire to sort of have an end goal of some sort, a place where you can stop.
Yep.
And the irony is that we're always putting that place we can stop in the future, so therefore we can never stop. It's like
it's always out there.
It's like
it's always more, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like the image of the person driving a carriage with a carrot on the end of a stick in front of a horse. I mean, that's the way that a lot of us operate, thinking that, all we really want is that carrot, and we're just going to keep on moving towards that carrot, and never realizing that every time that we move forward towards the carrot, it also moves forward.
We can never get to it.
You can never get to it.
And it almost takes like a special amount of understanding yourself to really realize, when you've achieved that carrot, and you're not, and to realize, maybe this is good enough, and I don't need to, go that extra little bit, and have that ultimate goal, I guess, or that end point where you've clearly defined it, so that you're able to actually achieve it, as opposed to just be continuing to chase the carrot, kind of as you mentioned.
Well, a lot of times though, it's that we're focusing on the carrot, right? That's the thing that's right in front of us.
Yeah.
And the moment that you turn your head, or maybe, if to continue with the example of a horse, look down, there might be one right in front of you. It might be, maybe it's not a carrot, maybe it's something else. But we oftentimes are looking at that thing that's directly in front of us and thinking that that's going to get us to a place of stillness in some sort of accomplishment, where something shifts and we no longer need to try to achieve that particular feeling of accomplishment, of acceptance, of whatever it is that we particularly want. The problem is that as long as you're moving towards that and you see that in the future, you know that there's no end. And it's oftentimes, and this is once again where like working with a coach or even, certain journaling practices can help, where it's, okay, you're looking straight ahead and you've been looking there for a long time. Let's do the really scary thing and look to the left or look to the right and see what might be on either one of those sides.
Yeah. So where does like meditation play into this? I mean, I know that's like a good way of like taking a moment, being mindful and present, and almost like turning your head, right?
Well, it can. And so what it's doing is, it's the easiest way for me to describe the way that I think most meditation impacts most people is that it allows you to identify and differentiate the listener from like the talker in your head, right? It's not about necessarily coming to stillness. It's in coming to a completely quiet mind people tell me, oh, I tried meditating, but my mind just kept going. I couldn't have an empty mind. Well, you're not going to get to that point. I mean, even great, meditators are not really getting to a point of absolutely nothing. What they're doing is they're recognizing, oh, that's a thought. I'm going to just say, okay, that's a thought, and let it keep floating by.
Yeah.
And not instead say, ooh, that's interesting. Ooh, let me keep going down that. It's, you know how thoughts work. It's sort of like, going to look up a potential customer online, and before you know it, you're reading about some obscure, something obscure on Wikipedia, and it's 2 a.m. What the
hell happened? What happened in the last 6 hours? What the hell? God, I got to write that blog post. I got to get this out. Yeah, that's so funny.
And that's exactly what happens in our brains all the time.
Yeah. It's bad almost. Then that the internet is like a reflection of that internal state, right? It just it's infinite. It just lets you just keep going for however long you want to go. So it's almost like you have to bring yourself in and be really mindful there. So that's really cool.
It makes you focus on, or at least be aware of the fact that, oh, this is a thought. I'm moving in a different direction. And so it's interesting because when people say that they have better control over their emotions, for instance, as a result of meditation, what it's doing is it's helping you achieve that concept of really having like a sixth sense, of being able to say like, ooh, that emotion, that feeling within my body, that's a feeling that's not, that I can recognize and I can experience, but I don't have to be controlled by, much like thoughts then. It's a thought that I can experience and recognize as a thought and choose to pursue or choose to give up or choose to just disconnect with, let it keep going.
Yeah, that's actually interesting, being able to make that choice instead of being ruled. I think a lot of people are ruled by their emotions, right? They're driven by them, and fear and anger and all these other things.
Yeah.
To take a moment to just let that, to recognize that is an emotion and you can let it go is really interesting and important. So anyway, I want to talk about you a little bit. So why coaching? Why not be a dog trainer?
That would be easier. Actually, I tell people that my dog has been my greatest coach. You realize very much when you work with a dog that there's whatever is like your underlying intention or the motivation behind an action is reflected in the dog. If you treat it with love, it reacts with love. If you treat it with like anger or fear, that's how they react as well. So, that being said, the reason that I got into coaching was I had been fortunate to have a few successful businesses, and while I was going through that process of building my businesses as a young entrepreneur, I'd sought out some help and some assistance, and I was fortunate to have some mentors that I worked with, but I wanted something more. And I had worked with a performance psychologist who was very helpful. But at one point he actually said, hey, we've done a lot of work here. You might want to consider getting a coach. And from that point on, I've worked with coaches, for almost, I think it's 7 or 8 years at this point, pretty consistently. And so the experience of working with a coach, and then also the experience of when I was running my own businesses, going and getting training in coaching as a management style, which at the time, especially from where I sit today, I really wasn't very good at it. But it opened my eyes to the possibilities there. Then also having the perspective of having sold my businesses and looking back and seeing all of the mistakes that I was making that I couldn't see at the time. And looking back and also seeing where I maybe fought my coach on those things because I didn't have that perspective. Those led to, those experiences led to where I am today. But one really sort of key experience came when I started working with entrepreneurs in the capacity of advisor and running into the challenge of recognizing that what they were facing was actually mostly due to the perspective or what was going on within their own head. And for instance, they thought they wanted to get to, 1 million users. they didn't understand why they wanted to get there other than growth for growth's sake. And because of that, the decisions that they were making, whether it was that they were trying to prove themselves to someone else, gain acceptance, no longer be a loner, whatever it was, which I'm using sort of more extreme examples in that, the entrepreneurs aren't generally just isolated loners. Some of us are. But having that realization that coming from more of an advisor standpoint, focusing on the business was not the most direct path to achieving success for an entrepreneur, because success is a pretty loaded term anyways. But that experience got me to a point where I said, hey, this is not the way to go. I want to focus on working with the individual first, and then having that impact the rest of the business. And so for the last 3 years, that's been my focus, is working directly with the entrepreneur, the founder, as opposed to first the business and then the founder.
That's great. So one of the things I also want to talk about is the drama triangle. So, this is an interesting concept that we talked about over dinner once, and it stuck with me. And I'd love for you to just to kind of walk through where it came from, and what it is and your interpretation and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So it comes out of a study of psychology, or an area of psychology called transactional analysis, which is, rather than focusing solely on the individual and digging deep into your psyche and psychoanalysis, it's analyzing the transactions or the interactions between people. Just like you and I having this conversation here. This is a transaction. And a guy named Stephen Karpman came up with a framework for analyzing those, or for identifying a certain type of interaction that often occurs amongst people. That his analysis originally came from the study of fairy tales. And so it was Little Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, all of these fairy tales. And he identified 3 roles that are consistent in basically every story that has drama within it. And that's victim, persecutor, and rescuer. So if you think about those positions, victim is inherent to this triangle, which I think we've all seen people who have sort of self-victimized, right? You certainly can see it if you turn on, Real Housewives of anywhere. But you can also, you can see this paradigm also clearly in things like, Marvel comic book movies, for instance, where you have someone who is a victim, and then there's the persecutor. You've got, a victim, and then you've got, Joker, the bad guy, and then Batman, the hero, right? But there's situations where, even in those examples, where Batman becomes sort of the villain, right? And then someone else is the victim, or Batman is the victim, and there's someone else is the villain, and then Batman is saved by, I don't know my comic books well enough, but by
whoever. Yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so ultimately, the dynamic comes down to a victim facing a persecutor, and that persecutor is impacting that victim in a way, putting them into a position that's undesirable. And the victim has 3 choices there. The first is to seek the help of a hero. And that hero is someone who comes in and says, oh, victim, you poor person, let me help you. You can't possibly do that yourself. So if you think about that in the context of a kid playing basketball, if the coach said, you know what, Timmy, you suck at 3-point shots, I'm just going to go out on the court and take them for you. What that's doing is taking the power of Timmy to learn to become a great 3-point shot. It's completely taking that power away. And what that hero is doing is feeling good, saying, oh, I helped him. He doesn't have to go through the pain of learning. And in the process, the hero is actually creating a victim, where that victim was really only the victim of the, fact that he couldn't shoot 3-pointers, right? And maybe lose a game and then have to experience, the hurt of or the pain of loss for a little bit. But that hero there is preventing the victim from having that experience, and therefore disempowering the victim and making the victim. Because were it not for the coach that says, I'll take the 3-point shot for you, I mean, it sounds ridiculous because that's not what a coach would do.
Yeah.
But if that were to happen, then if that weren't there, then the person taking or that can't make the 3-point shot, little Timmy, has to actually go out and practice and can choose to either take the second option, which is view the 3-point shot or view shooting 3-pointers as a challenge to be overcome. So actually work to achieve something, or just accept, I live in a world where I'm never going to make a 3-point shot, so I'm just going to give up and move on and focus on something else. So when the hero shows up, it puts that person into a victim position, whereas without the hero, that victim would not be a victim. That would either be someone choosing to take on that challenge, that persecutor, or saying, you know what, screw it, this is my new reality, I'm going to move on with life.
It sounds very much like that story where if you give a man a fish,
Absolutely.
or you teach a man to fish, that whole story. That's super interesting. So let's jump into just a little quick fire round, basically. I'm going to ask you a few different questions and we'll just, kind of see where it goes. So what's your favorite book?
My favorite book. My favorite book that I probably have given to the most people is a book called Deep Survival by Lawrence Gonzalez. And it's about why certain people survive in life or death situations and other people don't.
Wow.
And
sounds awesome.
It's really cool.
It actually does sound really awesome.
Yeah. But when you read it through the lens of leadership and business, there's so many parallels between what people do naturally to survive and what causes an individual to survive in a life or death situation, and what causes an organization to survive, and what makes really a great leader amongst a team in any situation. So it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it.
Sounds like a great read. So along the same parallel, what do you read on a daily basis? Any blogs or newspapers or magazines?
So I read The Economist. I read Harvard Business Review. What else do I read? I'll occasionally page through some of those other magazines, but I don't actually read a ton of stuff online. I do a lot of more.
Probably a good thing.
Maybe.
There's a lot of stuff online. It's just whatever, So what do you wish you knew 2 years ago?
Oh, man. What do I wish I knew 2 years ago? That I definitely wish that I knew that I didn't need to try so hard and to just sort of let things happen.
Yeah.
I was at a dinner last night that we briefly talked about the difference between a linear curve and an exponential curve. And there's a long time where that exponential curve is existing underneath the linear one. And so when you're building something that's exponential, there's that time where you're feeling uncomfortable because you're just not having that same growth that someone that's following a linear path would have.
Yeah.
And relaxing into that exponential path is difficult, but when you find it, it's extremely rewarding. So learning to telling myself to relax and just sort of let the exponential happen would have been helpful. I don't know if I could have listened to it 2 years ago though.
let the exponential happen. That's amazing. I love it. So what advice? This is just slightly longer than quick fire, but what advice would you give to somebody who finds themselves in a leadership position for the first time? So first time leader, not necessarily first time founder, but maybe they're leading a organization or something for the first time, or they've been like thrust into leadership position, and it's something that really counts and really matters.
Yeah, I would say that if you're thrust into a leadership position, do not try to be a leader, first and foremost. When you're trying to be a leader, when you're trying to step up and take on the adornments or the mannerisms or the skills of being a leader, that's not what motivates people. That's not how people are led. What really will drive people is that connection at a personal level, and leadership takes the ability to connect with people and understand them. And by putting barriers between yourself and someone else, for instance, saying, "Oh, I'm CEO. What do I have to do to act like a CEO or to act more?"
Whatever that means.
Yeah. All you're doing is you're putting more and more barriers between yourself and the people that you're leading, and it doesn't make you a better leader. There's a time and a place for that type of role, and it's almost never in day-to-day business. And so if you need to get a coach, get a good mentor or advisor, but don't try to be the CEO, don't try to be the leader. First and foremost, try to connect with the people at a basic level.
That's awesome. So I'm just going to go back right now. I'm going to record the intro and then in a couple of questions, and then we'll just splice it in. So it's leadership coach, right? Is that your official title?
Yeah, leadership coach.
Leadership coach.
Yeah, that's probably the best title.
Okay.
My business card doesn't have anything on it. So
okay. Welcome back. So I'm here with Brian Smith, who's a leadership coach based in Los Angeles here. Actually, Manhattan Beach, right?
Same difference. Los Angeles County, I guess. Yeah. Manhattan Beach, though.
Well, thanks for chatting with us today.
Yeah.
So I know that you've been working on new projects for founders who are raising funding.
Yeah.
I'd love to kind of hear about that.
Yeah. So this project is one that it's been going on for a little while now, but we recently opened it up to founders who are outside of our sort of core network, right? It's no longer just invitation only, and these are groups that consist of 5 founders that are going through fundraising. And the goal of these groups is to actually sort of make the most painful part of running a business a little bit less painful. And sort of paradoxically, we don't discuss fundraising in these groups. So we use the time to focus on the health of the founder and the health of their business. And it's basically working through or working from the philosophy that raising funds for your business is much easier when you are a healthy, sane founder representing a well-run business. Mm-hmm. And so we are not sitting there talking about pitch decks or talking about different tactics or exchanging contacts. What we're actually doing is digging into the mental, physical, relationship, even sometimes financial health of the founder, and checking in on their business and making sure that especially those that are going through their first really large round, going through whether it's Series A, B, C, that they're not losing sight of their role as a leader, because too often that's the point in a business when the CEO becomes sort of a figurehead and spends most of their time out trying to fundraise, which is a role, but it's not the only role a CEO plays. Yeah,
it's true. It's hard to balance doing work versus leading. And I find that a big thing in my life. It's super hard to balance, especially if you're in a startup environment where there's so much to do and you have to actually do it, but at the same time continue to motivate and inspire and encourage other people to do the right thing on a daily basis and to go through the trenches with you. I find that really, really difficult. Any tips for folks like me out there to figure that out?
Making sure that you know what you're building towards and being in touch with your customer base is extremely important. One of the things that I think we've all seen happen with entrepreneurs is doing a lot of that work that you mentioned in isolation, and then finding out that you've been building something that nobody gives a damn about. That's the worst part. Yeah. So especially when you're doing work, I mean, it's sort of the Pareto principle, right? You want to focus on how do you put all of your energy, 80% of your energy into that 20% that really creates value, or how do you put 100% of your energy into that 20% that really creates value for the company? And when it's just when it's an early stage startup, you sometimes can't even focus on 20%. You got to focus on, you got to figure out like, what is that 5% that really is going to make the difference? And so that's where the role of the CEO comes in you're the one that then needs to make that tough decision to focus on a specific, 5% or 1%, when it's pretty obvious to everybody else in the room that you're only talking about 5% and there's this other 95% of stuff that needs to get done.
And it's a mess, right?
It's an utter mess.
It's always, yeah.
But that's where, everybody talks about hustle, right? And they talk about, it's hard work. It's trying to pack a lot of stuff in. It's not the hard work that's going to make you successful. It's the hard choices. And making a choice sometimes to focus on a specific aspect of your business and really, really put all of your resources into it, that's what's going to make you ultra successful if you're right. And that's the problem, is it's scary to make that hard decision, to make that focus. And that's where, the work of the CEO is also to be that nexus, that connection between external stakeholders and internal ones, and then to take all of that information, synthesize it, identify the signal amongst all of that noise, and then create a direction. That's a lot of work to be doing. It's a big challenge. But if you want to be CEO and you want to, if you're looking at how to do that effectively and grow the business, that's key. That's key.
That's great. Actually, I think that's a pretty good place to stop, actually. I mean, it's a really great insight. It's not the hard work, it's the hard choices that will make you successful. So thanks for chatting with us today. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thank you very much for having me.